On the northeast coast of England, where North Yorkshire meets the North Sea, the land ends abruptly. Cliffs rise straight from the water. Here, storms arrive without warning. The ground shifts and slides constantly, the sea pressing relentlessly at the base of the cliffs. This is not an easy landscape to cross, and it never has been. Yet, along this edge of England, threaded through rock and cliff, are signs that someone once tried. Beneath these cliffs, decisions were made, lines were measured, levels checked, chalk marks scratched into stone. Someone imagined a railway passing through solid rock, skirting the edge of the sea, creating a dramatic underground world we shall shortly be exploring. What remains now is proof that those decisions were carried out. A tunnel mouth cut cleanly into the cliff. Brickwork laid course by course, still holding back tons of unstable ground. An embankment raised where no natural slope existed. Nothing about this was accidental. They were deliberate acts of planning and labour. They show that in the 1800s, a great deal of effort was spent here by people who expected this place to matter. And yet something is missing. The trains no longer run. The noise of the railway has gone. The work is here, but the life it supported is no more. The tunnels remain. They are still there, but the people who built and used them are gone. So who exactly did build this? We're not talking here about the railway engineers whose names appear in company records or on plaques. Not the men celebrated in histories or portraits. They are not the subject of this video. What we are talking about are the people who actually carried out the work. The men who did the physical labour, underground and above it. Many at the cost of their own lives. Lives often so little thought of. There remains very little record of their names. Their work is often the only proof they existed, and they were the navigational engineers, or navvies. This is Rails and Revolutions, the history that built us, the forces that shaped us. These men were not unique to this site. Before the railways, navvies built canals, cuttings and tunnels across Britain. They moved earth, shaped waterways and built infrastructure that connected the country. Later, many of these same workers moved on to railway construction, including lines like this one along the North Yorkshire coast. The remains of the work of these people is visible all over the world, But for this video, we're going to look at one of the most dangerous aspects of their work, how it was done, the injuries, deaths that resulted, and how these people lived in an effort to better understand these people whose lives and way of life has largely been pushed into the shadows of history. The Whitby, Redcar and Middlesbrough Union Railway sought to connect Whitby with the industrial towns of Teesside. On paper, it promised opportunity and connection. In practice, it demanded railways to be forced across cliffs, landslips and constantly moving ground. Between Whitby and Sandsend, the coast offered no gentle route. The railway had to cling to the cliffs, diving repeatedly into tunnels to avoid sheer drops and unstable slopes. Two of the most formidable were Kettleness Tunnel and Sandsend Tunnel. I step into the first of these tunnels if you're heading south on the line, Kettleness. The entrance looms tall and narrow. You can feel the passage of air travelling through. The experience is intimidating, but inviting at the same time. Immediately, the air feels different, cool, damp, and heavy with an earthly odour. The echoes of my footsteps bounce off the walls, giving the impression that the tunnel itself is alive, holding the weight of centuries of labour within its bricks. Work began from the two portals. All excavation was done by hand with picks, shovels and black powder to blast through the rock. The interior required careful timber shoring immediately after each blast. Water seeped through the roof, carrying clay and dust. Every advance was hazardous. Lighting came from oil lamps and candles, and bricklayers followed close behind, lining the tunnel before the ground could shift. Ventilation was difficult, and conditions were harsh. Explosives were essential to break stubborn rock, but they were also a constant danger. On a similar 19th century tunnel project at Queensbury, several navvies lost their lives when failed explosive charges unexpectedly detonated as they were being withdrawn from drilled holes, fatally injuring them. These unintended explosions hurled men against the rock, leaving no time to react and illustrating how every blast carried risks far beyond the moment of ignition. As I walk further into Kettleness, it's impossible not to feel the weight of what these men endured. The narrow brick-lined bore feels constricting, the air heavy even now, and I imagine the smoke and dust that must have filled the space day after day. Thinking of the hundreds of hands swinging picks, the sweat and exhaustion, the constant threat of collapse or explosion. It's humbling. On our way through Kettleness, we come across a strange tunnel dug into the side. If followed, which we're not going to do today because it's in a bit of a bad condition, this would take us all the way to the cliffs beyond. What was it for? We should discuss that later. Within this hollowed out cliff, I feel a deep respect and quiet unease, realizing how much risk these workers faced just to carve a passage through the stone. and how their courage and toil are all but invisible today. Kettleness Tunnel opened on the 3rd of December 1883 and saw its last train when the line closed on the 5th of May 1958. After just 308 yards, we come to the end of Kettleness. Exiting, we can see the southern portal, which is in a good state of repair. For a distance beyond, the railway followed a shelf around the cliff, so there was no need for a tunnel here. Following the old track bed now, overgrown with trees and bushes. The sound of the ocean way below accompanying us. We come across the remains of the track base, with heavily rotten wooden retaining structures still in place. After 10 minutes of scrambling through the trees on the sledge above the waves, we see the shattered remains of Sandsend's northern portal, which was always under pressure from the cliff above. Even while the railway was operational, engineers had to reinforce the entrance with rings of bullhead rail to resist the weight of earth and rock. But nature was patient. Over many years, the hillside pushed inwards. The metal reinforcements eventually gave way, and in early 2008, about 6 feet of the tunnel's roof collapsed at the north portal, leaving a scarred gap in the old brickwork and heaps of rubble where the tunnel once opened to daylight. The portal's partial failure is a stark reminder that even the most formidable engineering can be overcome by geological pressure and time. These tunnels, the embankments, the brickwork, none of it happened by magic. It was the sweat, skill, and endurance of the navvies that shaped this coastline. Hundreds of navvies worked on lines like this, travelling from job to job across Britain. Many were Irish, Scottish, Cornish, or from rural England. Before the railways, some had built canals, cuttings, and tunnels. Their experience in moving earth, shaping waterways, and constructing infrastructure made them uniquely suited to the hazards of coastal railway work. Most men did not become navvies because they chose the work. They became navvies because other options had disappeared. As rural wages fell and traditional trades closed their doors, this was often the only work that paid regular cash and required no apprenticeship. Strength was enough to be hired. The work was dangerous, but the wages were higher than farm labour, and for men supporting families, that risk could mean survival. For many, especially migrants and displaced workers, navvying offered something rare, a way to earn, to move on when work ended, and to build something that would last, even if their own names did not. Some navvies brought families with them. They lived in temporary camps near the worksite. Wooden huts, corrugated iron lean-tos, perched on exposed ground. Wind from the North Sea cut straight through them. Damp was constant. Sanitation was basic, meaning disease was rife. They worked hard and drank harder. Their reputation for alcohol and quick tempers, meaning their arrival was often dreaded by local communities. Whilst the men worked, women cooked, children fetched water, and men laboured long shifts underground, 6 days a week. Despite the hardship, these camps formed tight communities. Men sang after shifts, wrote letters by lantern light, planted small gardens when the ground allowed, and decorated huts with scraps of wallpaper or religious prints. They were poor but not careless, temporary but not without pride. The entrance to Sandsend feels different. It's closer to the sea, the air is damp, salt hangs in the atmosphere. From the first steps inside, water is present. The tunnel feels alive in a way Kettleness did not. This is a longer tunnel and a more complicated one. At nearly a mile in length, Sandsend could not be driven simply from its two portals. The cliffs above offered little room, and the unstable ground demanded speed. To make progress, engineers attacked the tunnel from multiple points at once. Deeper inside, the tunnel opens upwards. This is the first construction shaft. Standing at its base, the scale becomes clear. Brickwork rises beyond the reach of light. The shaft once opened directly to the surface, allowing men, materials, and spoil to move vertically as well as horizontally. Sandsend Tunnel was sunk using 5 vertical shafts in total. Two were created early, narrow and functional, to accelerate excavation. The remaining 3 were added later, widened to improve ventilation once trains and steam engines began running on the line. At similar 19th century tunnels, the base of a shaft could be lethal. 30-year-old Richard Sutcliffe was killed at Queensbury Tunnel when a spoil skip fell down a shaft and struck him. Men like Henry Jones, 39, and John Goe, 40, died when explosive charges detonated prematurely near the vertical workings. At Sandsend, navvies working at the foot of this shaft would have faced the same combination of heavy materials, unstable rock, and confined space. One misstep, one dropped tool, one moment of misjudgment, and life could end instantly. Shafts allowed work to proceed in several directions at once. From the base, navvies drove headings towards both tunnel portals. Men and materials were lowered daily. Spoil was hauled up, but shafts concentrated danger. Dropped tools, falling stone, failed ropes. At Standenge Tunnel, Navvy was killed when a loaded spoil tub fell back down a shaft during hoisting. Here, there would have been no escape. Vertical shafts were not the only way material left the tunnel. Every yard of progress produced vast quantities of broken rock, clay and shale. Hauling all of it through the tunnels to the portals would have been slow and exhausting. The solution? Was to cut sideways. They were not escape routes. They were not intended for trains or even long-term access. They existed for one purpose: spoil removal. Navvies pushed barrows and small tubs through these passages and tipped the waste directly over the edge of the cliffs. The material fell to the rocks and shore far below, removed from the site in seconds. It was efficient, it saved time and labour. But their presence tells us something important. This tunnel was not built carefully or gently. It was forced through the land using urgency, improvisation and risk to overcome a coastline that resisted every attempt to cross it. Moving further on, the tunnel grows wetter. Then another shaft of interest opens above. Water pours continuously down its walls, striking the floor below. Debris has built up at the base: broken brick, stone fragments, silt. All 5 shafts were capped when the line closed in 1958, but water still finds its way down, just as it did during construction. For the men working here, water meant slipping tools, weakened supports, poor lighting and constant cold. It hid danger. It amplified exhaustion. Water pouring down an open shaft could be more than chilling. It could be fatal. At Queensbury Tunnel, Henry Ingham drowned at the base of a shaft and Sutcliffe Hodgson fell down another, killed instantly. Standing here, with water cascading around us, you can't help but imagine how slippery, treacherous and unforgiving this environment must have been. The southern third of Sandsend Tunnel feels different. This is where the water begins to win. It seeps in through the rock above, following old fractures, gathering behind brickwork never designed to hold back pressure for this long. The tunnel hasn't failed, but it has started to move. The refugees show it first. Once crisp and square, their walls now bow outwards. Brick courses ripple, mortar softens. Eventually, the southern portal of Sandsend comes into view. The light from outside is faint and the tunnel feels longer here than it ever did in the middle. But there is no exit. The portal has been sealed up. A wall of solid masonry seals the tunnel from the world beyond. Looking back into the darkness I've just walked through, the passage seems even more monumental. Every footstep echoes differently. The shadows are deeper. The air carries the weight of all who laboured here. It is impossible not to reflect on the thousands of hands that swung picks, lifted stone, and pushed barrows through this confined, damp, treacherous place. To reach this end is to feel a connection to those lives long since past, whose courage and toil are now the only traces left. Standing here, the tunnel feels like a bridge across time, a record of human skill, endurance, and risk, stretching from portal to portal, yet hiding its stories behind brick and stone. But what became of the Navvies? By the late 19th century, the great age of hand-cut canals, tunnels and railways was drawing to a close. Machinery increasingly replaced muscle. New railway lines became fewer, shorter and cheaper. For the Navvies, there was no clear ending. No final contract, no memorial. Just fewer jobs, shorter periods of work, and eventually, silence. By the time lines like this closed, the men who built them already belonged to an earlier age. Their camps had vanished, their communities disappeared. All that remained was the work itself, fixed into the land long after the hands that shaped it were gone. When the tunnels opened, there was optimism. Trains ran beneath the cliffs carrying passengers and goods along the coast. But the sea never relented. Landslips plagued the line almost from the start. Maintenance costs soared. Storms buried track. Repairs became constant. By the mid-20th century, the economics collapsed. Passenger services were withdrawn. Freight lingered briefly, then silence. The tunnels were abandoned. Most of their names are lost. Yet their work endures in the tunnels, the shafts, the side adits, the brick-lined bore, carved into the cliffs themselves. From canals to railways, inland cuttings to coastal passages, these men shaped the land with skill and courage. They were not celebrated, but their work speaks for them. Even now, walking amongst these ruins, it is impossible not to feel their presence, quiet, unyielding, and perhaps now, a little less forgotten.